They make me vomit. This is an art form. It's also a form of commerce, and it makes money, but it's an art.
At 77, Richard Dreyfuss has finally opened up about the one actor whose on-set behavior pushed him to reconsider his career. After years of navigating Hollywood's highs and lows, Dreyfuss shared that it wasn't just scripts or fame that motivated him, but a powerful moment when another star's actions crossed the line, triggering a shift he never saw coming. Hollywood is a town built on stories, on myths, on legends. It creates them, and sometimes it consumes them. For decades, Richard Dreyfuss was one of its most compelling protagonists. He was the everyman hero, the fast-talking intellectual, the face of a generation of filmmakers who changed the very language of cinema. He battled a great white shark, communed with aliens, and won an Academy Award, all before he was 33 years old. He was, by any measure, a king in the kingdom of make-believe, which makes the central question of his later years all the more perplexing. Why did he leave? Not with a dramatic, headline-grabbing exit, but with a slow, deliberate fade, turning his back on the industry that had made him a household name. For years, the reasons seemed complex, a mix of aging out of leading roles, finding new passions, and a general dissatisfaction with the state of the world. But the truth, when you look closer, is both simpler and more profound. Richard Dreyfuss didn't just get tired of Hollywood. He was, in a sense, pushed out. He was forced into a kind of self-imposed exile by a rival he simply couldn't defeat, an adversary he couldn't outsmart. He was replaced by a new kind of star, an actor who came to dominate every audition, every greenlight meeting, and every blockbuster production. At 77, looking back on a life of incredible highs and challenging lows, the identity of this actor, this ultimate rival, is finally clear. It's an actor who reshaped the entire landscape of the movie business, and in doing so, left no room for a man like Richard Dreyfuss. To understand who, or what, this actor is, you first have to understand the world that Richard Dreyfuss came from. You have to go back to the 1970s, a period now spoken of in reverent tones as New Hollywood. It was a brief, incandescent moment when the old studio system had crumbled and a new generation of directors, bristling with ideas from European art cinema and American counterculture, seized control. These were the years of Coppola, Scorsese, Altman, and a young, ferociously talented filmmaker named Steven Spielberg. In this new world, the director was king, and the story was sacred. More importantly, the actors were not just handsome faces, they were complex, neurotic, and deeply human. They were Pacino, De Niro, Hoffman, and a kid from Brooklyn with a boundless energy and an electric intelligence, Richard Dreyfuss. He wasn't classically handsome. He was short, a bit manic, and possessed a voice that could veer from a conspiratorial whisper to a torrent of rapid-fire dialogue. But he had an undeniable spark. He was relatable. You believed him. He had been a working actor since he was a teenager, grinding it out in television and small film parts, but his breakout came in 1973 with George Lucas's ode to teenage nostalgia, American Graffiti. As the college-bound Kurt Henderson, Dreyfuss was the soul of the film, torn between the comfortable past and an uncertain future. He was funny, he was thoughtful, and he held the screen. It was the role that put him on the map and, crucially, on the radar of Steven Spielberg. Spielberg was preparing to direct a movie based on a pulpy bestseller about a shark terrorizing a small island community. It was called Jaws. He initially offered the role of the oceanographer, Matt Hooper, to other actors, like Jon Voight, but he kept thinking about the guy from American Graffiti. Dreyfuss, however, was hesitant. He had just finished a stellar performance in a smaller Canadian film, The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz, and upon seeing his own work, he was convinced he had given a terrible, over-the-top performance that would end his career. He believed he needed another job, fast, before Duddy Kravitz came out and everyone realized he was a fraud. He thought Jaws would be a fun, quiet little movie that no one would see, allowing him to collect a paycheck and hide out while the storm from his other film blew over. It's one of the great ironies of film history. The performance he thought was a disaster earned him rave reviews. and the Little Shark movie he took to escape scrutiny became the biggest motion picture in history. The production of Jaws is legendary for its misery. The mechanical shark, nicknamed Bruce, rarely worked. The weather was awful. The schedule ballooned from 55 days to 159. The actors, stranded on boats for hours on end, grew frustrated. There was tension between Dreyfuss and his co-star, Robert Shaw, who played the grizzled shark hunter Quint. Shaw was a seasoned, hard-drinking British stage actor who saw the younger Dreyfuss as an ambitious, insecure Hollywood kid. He would taunt him, trying to get a rise out of him. But Spielberg later realized that this tension was gold. It bled into their characters' relationship, creating the crackling, antagonistic chemistry between Hooper, the book-smart academic, and Quint, the salty man of the sea. Dreyfuss, for his part, channeled his ambition and anxiety into Hooper. He was the audience's surrogate, the voice of science and reason in a world gone mad. When he screams, "This is not a boat accident," you feel his frustration. When he sees the shark for the first time, and his face drains of color as he mutters, "You're gonna need a bigger boat," you feel his terror. Jaws didn't just change Hollywood by creating the summer blockbuster, it cemented Richard Dreyfuss as a major star. He immediately re-teamed with Spielberg for Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Here, he wasn't the cynical scientist, he was Roy Neary, an ordinary powerline worker whose life is turned upside down by an encounter with a UFO. It's a quintessential Dreyfuss performance. He captures the wonder, the obsession, the sublime madness of a man who sees something extraordinary and is willing to sacrifice his family, his job, and his sanity to understand it. The scene where he sculpts Devil's Tower out of his mashed potatoes is iconic. It's funny, pathetic, and deeply moving all at once. Dreyfuss was the perfect vessel for Spielberg's vision because he could ground the fantastical in something real and emotional. You don't just watch Roy Neary, you feel his obsessive pull toward the stars. While he was making these colossal hits with Spielberg, he was also pursuing smaller, more character-driven work. And in 1977, he found the role that would take him to the summit. It was a Neil Simon romantic comedy called The Goodbye Girl. He played Elliot Garfield, a struggling, arrogant, but ultimately good-hearted actor who is forced to share an apartment with a cynical single mother and her precocious daughter. It's a part that weaponized all of Dreyfuss's greatest strengths: his wit, his vulnerability, his neurotic energy. His performance is a masterclass in comedic timing and emotional depth. And the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences agreed. In the spring of 1978, Richard Dreyfuss won the Oscar for Best Actor. At 30 years old, he was, at the time, the youngest man to ever win the award. On stage, he was giddy, charmingly overwhelmed, cracking jokes and thanking his parents. He was on top of the world. He was the new Hollywood ideal, a critically acclaimed, commercially successful, Oscar-winning leading man. But the brightest lights often cast the darkest shadows. The very forces that fueled his meteoric rise, the intensity, the ambition, the relentless energy, were intertwined with a dangerous self-destructive streak. Dreyfuss has been unflinchingly honest about his struggles with cocaine during this period. He described it as a slow, insidious slide into an addiction that nearly cost him everything. It fueled his arrogance and eroded his judgment. There were on-set difficulties, car crashes, and a growing reputation for being difficult. His career, which had seemed unstoppable, began to falter. The hits were fewer and farther between. He was burning out. The fall was as swift as the rise. 1982. He was arrested for possession of cocaine and Percocet after blacking out at the wheel and crashing his Mercedes into a palm tree. It was a humiliating public rock bottom, but it was also a turning point. He got sober. He stepped away from the spotlight for a few years to put his life back together. When he returned in the mid-1990s, he was a changed man. He was humbled, he was healthier, and he was ready to work. And he staged one of the most remarkable comebacks in Hollywood history. He starred in a string of beloved hits like Down and Out in Beverly Hills, Stakeout, and the classic coming-of-age story, Stand By Me, where he played the adult narrator, providing the film's nostalgic, melancholic heart. The 1990s brought another career-defining role in Mr. Holland's opus. He played Glenn Holland, a musician and composer who reluctantly takes a job as a high school music teacher to make ends meet, only to find that teaching is his true calling. The film spans 30 years, and Dreyfuss beautifully portrays Holland's journey from a frustrated young artist to a beloved, fulfilled educator who has shaped the lives of generations of students. The performance earned him another Oscar nomination. He was back, he was respected, he was a survivor. But even as he enjoyed this second act, something was changing. Hollywood was changing. The new Hollywood of the 70s, the director-driven era that had birthed his career, was a distant memory. The blockbuster mentality that Jaws had unintentionally created had mutated into something else entirely. Studios were no longer interested in character-driven dramas or quirky comedies unless they came with a built-in franchise potential. The business was becoming less about art and more about intellectual property. It was about sequels, reboots, and cinematic universes. The kinds of films that had made Dreyfuss a star of mid-budget, adult-oriented stories were becoming an endangered species. And as the industry changed, Dreyfuss himself began to change. He found a new passion, one that started to consume him far more than acting ever had. It began with a simple, troubling observation. He realized that his own children, and their friends, didn't have the same basic understanding of American history and government that he had taken for granted. They didn't know about the separation of powers, the Bill of Rights, or the principles of due process. To him, this wasn't just a failure of education, it was an existential threat to the Republic. He believed that a democratic society cannot survive without an informed citizenry, and he saw that foundation crumbling. This wasn't a passing interest, it became an obsession, a calling. He spent years studying, reading, and traveling the country, speaking to anyone who would listen about the crisis in civic education. He went to Oxford University in England for a period to study history more formally. He realized that his fame as an actor gave him a platform, a way to open doors and command attention for a cause he believed was infinitely more important than any movie. In 2006, he founded the Dreyfuss Civics Initiative, a non-profit organization dedicated to reviving the teaching of civics in American public schools. Its mission is to use the power of celebrity to get the media's attention and the power of the media to get the public's attention and encourage legislation that would make civics a required and engaging part of the curriculum. He developed his own curriculum, gave lectures, and lobbied politicians. He was no longer just an actor, he was an activist, a public intellectual. And the more time he spent trying to save the country, the less time and patience he had for Hollywood. He started to see the industry not just as frivolous, but as part of the problem. He saw the films being made as a reflection of the very dumbing down of society that his initiative was designed to combat. The nuanced, complex stories he loved were being replaced by loud, simplistic spectacles. The heroes were no longer relatable everymen like Roy Neary. They were superhuman figures in capes. The dialogue was no longer witty and sharp like in The Goodbye Girl. It was quippy one. Liners designed for a trailer. He felt a profound sense of alienation from the business that had once been his entire world. This is where we begin to unmask the identity of the actor who made him quit. The first face of this rival is the modern studio system. This actor doesn't have a name or a face. It's a corporation. It's a spreadsheet. It's an algorithm. The new Hollywood that Dreyfuss thrived in was run by directors and gut feelings. A studio head might back a risky project like Close Encounters simply because he believed in the filmmaker's vision. Today, this new actor, the studio system, makes decisions based on data, on market research, on four-quadrant appeal. It wants guaranteed returns, and the safest bet is a pre-existing brand. It wants a movie that will play as well in China as it does in Ohio, which often means prioritizing spectacle over dialogue and cultural specificity. This actor has no interest in a small human story like The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz. It wouldn't know what to do with a film like Mr. Holland's Opus. Dreyfuss once said, "The art of film is a dead art form. It's been dead for a while." To him, this new actor, the corporate entity, had murdered it. It had replaced artistry with assembly line production. It had taken the soul out of the business. How can a human actor, with all his quirks and complexities, compete with a rival who is a global multi-billion-dollar corporation obsessed with risk management? He can't, so he stops trying. The second face of this rival is the audience. This is a trickier, more controversial idea, but it's one that Dreyfuss himself has alluded to. This new actor is not just the people buying the tickets, it's the cultural zeitgeist they represent. Dreyfuss comes from a time when going to the movies was a central cultural experience. A film like Jaws or The Graduate could capture the national conversation for months. Today, culture is fractured into a million tiny pieces. The audience is distracted, inundated with content from streaming services, social media, and video games. Dreyfuss believes that this new audience, a product of the same failed education system he is fighting, has lost the appetite for challenging material. He sees a link between a decline in civic literacy and a decline in media literacy. If you don't have the patience to read the Constitution, you probably don't have the patience for a 2-hour film that relies on slow-burn character development. This new actor, the audience, craves instant gratification. It wants faster pacing, more explosions, less ambiguity. It's an actor that prefers the sugar rush of a comic book movie to the nutritional value of a complex drama. In a way, Dreyfuss's Civics initiative is an attempt to retrain this actor, to re-educate the audience so that they might once again demand better, smarter entertainment. But in the meantime, he feels like he's performing for a crowd that no longer speaks his language. He's a classical actor performing Shakespeare in a TikTok world. It's a lonely, frustrating position to be in. And this leads us to the third, and perhaps most powerful, face of the actor who drove him from Hollywood. This is the one he has been most vocal and most furious about in recent years. This actor's name is ideology, specifically what is often referred to as woke or politically correct culture. For Dreyfuss, a self-described liberal and lifelong Democrat, this new force in Hollywood is a betrayal of the very principles of art and free expression. He views it as a rigid, censorious dogma that puts political messaging ahead of artistic merit. The flashpoint for him has been the diversity and inclusion standards implemented by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences for Best Picture eligibility. These rules, designed to encourage representation on and off screen, are, in his words, something that make me vomit. He has argued passionately that art should not be judged by these kinds of quotas or checklists. He believes that an actor's job is to embody another human being, regardless of their race, gender, or background. He famously defended Laurence Olivier's 1965 performance in Othello, where the white actor wore blackface to play the Moorish general. He said, "He played a black man brilliantly. Am I being told that I will never have a chance to play a black man? Is someone else being told that if they're not Jewish, they shouldn't play the Merchant of Venice? Are we crazy?" 1. To many, these comments sound out of touch, even offensive. They see them as a defense of outdated practices that denied opportunities to actors of color for decades. But to understand Dreyfuss's position, you have to see it through his eyes. He sees this new actor, this ideology, as a form of totalitarian thought control. It tells artists what they can and cannot say, what stories they can and cannot tell, who they can and cannot play. This, for him, is the antithesis of art. The new Hollywood he came from was about breaking rules, not creating new ones. It was about challenging the establishment, not enforcing a new orthodoxy. He sees a generation of artists who are afraid to take risks, afraid to say the wrong thing and be cancelled. He feels that this new actor, this zealous ideology, has replaced the spirit of open inquiry with a climate of fear. It has turned storytelling into a political purity test. Whether you agree with him or not, it is undeniable that this belief is a core reason for his estrangement from the modern industry. He is a man who values freedom of thought and expression above all else, and he believes Hollywood has surrendered that freedom to this powerful new actor. He cannot and will not work for a rival whose core values are so antithetical to his own. He would rather walk away. Finally, there is one last face to this complex rival. It's the most personal one. The actor who made Richard Dreyfuss quit Hollywood was, in some ways, Richard Dreyfuss himself. It was the ghost of the young man who starred in Jaws and Close Encounters. It was the legacy of the actor who won an Oscar at 30. How do you compete with that? As an actor ages, the roles inevitably change. You are no longer the romantic lead or the young hero. You are the father, the grandfather, the wise old mentor. For some actors, This is a graceful transition. For a man with Dreyfuss's intensity and ambition, it may have been a difficult adjustment. He had reached the very pinnacle of his profession so early in life. Everything that came after had to be measured against that incredible peak. Perhaps the roles he was being offered in his 60s and 70s simply didn't excite him. Perhaps they didn't feel worthy of the legacy he had built. It's not that he couldn't get work, it's that the work no longer held the same meaning. This is where his civics work becomes so important. It offered him something that Hollywood no longer could: a sense of purpose, a mission. On a movie set, he was a hired hand, a piece of a larger puzzle, but with his civics initiative, he was the driving force. He was the writer, the director, and the star of his own real-life drama. And the stakes were so much higher. He wasn't just trying to make a good movie, he was trying to save American democracy. Compared to that, playing a cranky grandpa in a forgettable comedy must have seemed trivial. He had found a new story to tell, a new role to play, and it was a role that he felt was far more significant than anything Hollywood could offer. He didn't quit acting because he couldn't compete with other actors of his generation, like De Niro or Pacino. He quit because he couldn't compete with the memory of his own past, and because he found a new competitor, a new cause, that demanded his full attention. The young, ambitious actor who wanted to be a movie star had been replaced by an older, passionate citizen who wanted to be a patriot. So, who was the actor that made Richard Dreyfuss quit Hollywood? It wasn't one person. It was a four-headed beast, a new kind of leading man that took over the town. Its first face was the modern studio system, a cold, corporate entity that valued profits over art. Its second face was the modern audience, a fractured, distracted public that, in his view, had lost its taste for complex stories. Its third, most fearsome face was ideology, a rigid political correctness that he saw as a threat to artistic freedom. And its final, most intimate face was his own legacy, the ghost of his past triumphs that no future role could ever hope to match. Faced with this insurmountable rival, Dreyfuss did the only thing he could. He refused to play the game. He refused to audition for a part in a show he no longer believed in. He chose to step off the stage and dedicate his life's third act to a different kind of performance, one he writes and directs himself. It's easy to dismiss him as a grumpy old man, yelling at a cloud, nostalgic for a past that never really existed. And some of his recent public statements have certainly been abrasive and controversial, alienating many who once admired him. But that's too simple a reading. His journey is more complicated than that. It is the story of an artist grappling with a changing world and a changing industry. It is the story of a man who reached the heights of fame and found it wanting. It is the story of a citizen who became so concerned about the future of his country that he was willing to sacrifice his lucrative and celebrated career to try and fix it. He hasn't retired completely. He still shows up in a movie now and then, often in smaller, independent projects, but his heart is clearly elsewhere. His passion, the fire that once lit up the screen in films like Jaws and The Goodbye Girl, is now directed towards town halls, lecture circuits, and classrooms. He is no longer playing Roy Neary, the man obsessed with the lights in the sky. He is now Richard Dreyfuss, the man obsessed with the foundational principles of his nation. He believes that the answer to our problems is not in the stars, but in the pages of the Constitution. Whether he is a prophet or a crank, a hero or a relic, is for history to decide. But what is certain is that Richard Dreyfuss did not just fade away. He made a choice. He saw the new star that was taking over Hollywood, and he decided he wanted no part of it. He walked away from the kingdom of make-believe to fight for what he believes is real. And that may be the most compelling role he has ever played. Richard Dreyfuss's revelation reminds us that even the brightest stars have breaking points, and sometimes it's the unseen moments behind the camera that shape a career. His honesty highlights how respect and professionalism matter, no matter how glittering the lights are, how grand the legacy.